Adventures in Supply Chain podcast is pleased to announce the Coronavirus and Supply Chain series to help our communities with the insights of outstanding leaders in supply chain and in other critical functions. These challenging times are also for transformations and opportunities. We will get through this together, and we will make it happen. It's our pleasure to introduce Paul Malone, Director, Purchasing Functional Excellence at Allison Transmission, the world's largest manufacturer of fully automatic transmissions for medium and heavy-duty commercial vehicles and a leader in hybrid propulsion systems for city buses. Paul is a strategic, results-driven attorney with progressive experience leveraging legal skills and business acumen to identify and mitigate supply chain risk. With his expertise in legal, commercial, and operational issues associated with technology development from product preceding technology through full production, Paul successfully leads cross-functional teams to solve complex business problems and operationalize business strategies by implementing repeatable and reproducible processes. And now, with you, your host, Marcia, and her amazing guest, Paul Malone.
So, welcome, Paul. Thank you for coming to the show, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it. You know, we like talking about these issues, kind of talking shop. So this is a good opportunity to explore some issues. So thank you.
No, of course. And in this opportunity in particular, that you have great experience in legal and sourcing is the perfect combination. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question that we have for you, Paul. And at these times, like during COVID-19 and during post-COVID-19, where we are now, is it possible to renegotiate contracts or to make changes to the contract, the existing contracts?
And the answer is it's possible. I mean, it's always possible. I mean, even leaving aside COVID or any other force majeure event, if you have something that, you know, when the parties come together and they're putting together the arrangement, they have a set of assumptions. They have a set of assumptions in terms of volume, in terms of availability of materials, in terms of their ability to deliver what's being asked to be delivered. And if any of those assumptions change, one party can approach the other party and say, hey, we've had a change in assumptions. We need to revisit some of these. The trick is, if you have a contract, if you have a PO that's still within its term or a legal agreement, you can't change that unilaterally, typically. Mm-hmm. A lot of this depends on the terms and conditions that are in the specific agreement, but typically you're not going to be able to change it unilaterally. It's going to have to be agreed between the parties. And not only is it going to have to be agreed between the parties, it should be in writing. And sometimes there's going to be a requirement that it's a signed writing. So it's possible. Yes, it's possible. But you usually are going to have agreement between the parties, and it may have to be signed.
Great. And now I have like a follow-up question. You mentioned this can be considered force majeure, but in some cases, right, when we have a supplier and they say, I cannot meet the deadline because now we are having issues with production, and this is due to COVID-19. To what extent can we accept that and not to penalize? It's just with that, because in many cases, I just want to make sure, like, the suppliers don't put the blame on COVID-19, and they say, okay, it's due to that. How can we handle that kind of situation?
Well, it depends, and we've had a good test case here, and that's going to be the answer. A lot of times, it depends, right?
Yes.
But if, for example, with something like COVID-19, it's affected different geographic areas differently, both in the presence of the virus and, the outbreak, but also in how local governments have chosen to address it. So if you have somebody saying, you could be that, I have a stay-at-home order, this is the supplier. Our jurisdiction has ordered all businesses to shut down. So we have to shut down. Then nothing I can do about it. Well, that's not necessarily the case. If usually, with the stay-at-home orders, often there were exceptions for essential services. So then there was a question of, okay, well, what can I provide to that supplier so that they can demonstrate to their local authority that I'm supporting an essential service, so I need to be able to continue to produce. So if someone just says, hey, it's COVID-19, I think you have to ask the next question. Do you have people who are too sick to show up? That you can't get enough people to work? Is it that your facility is such that people can't work safely in the environment, so you can't really require people to come in? Is it that the government is saying, no, you've got to shut down, and we're all shutting down, and we're all shutting down for a certain period of time? So it's one of those, you've got to peel back the layers of it, and it could be that there's an issue, but that issue can be addressed by, for example, if you are deemed as providing an essential service, or you have an essential product, and you can provide documentation to the supplier that could say this, so where the supplier can demonstrate, hey, I'm supporting this essential service.
Yeah. And that's very interesting. And you are right. The virus had a different effect, and also the reaction or how government have been managing the situation. Yes, and with respect to that, many companies have great part of their supplier base in China and India. So in those cases, can we have legal contract with them?
Yes, it is. Yes, but.
Yes, but
it depends. But if you think about it, and this is just kind of in the nature, this is the world you and I have lived in for years, right? For years, is that we do business. We have suppliers that are across the globe. They're in different jurisdictions. So you have, we can enter into contracts. We can enter into kind of something that documents what we expect the parties to do. The question is, if something goes wrong, where do you go to who adjudicates the dispute? Where do you go to file a claim? How do you handle that? For example, it could be that if it's a non-US, because we're talking, let's say US, non-US company that you're buying from, they may have substantial, they could be headquartered outside of the US, but they could have substantial operations and assets in the United States. And so doing business with that company and saying, hey, we want to have any disputes heard by a US court or court of certain state under US law, that's not going to be that big a barrier. And if things go horribly wrong, you are going to have some assets or operations that you can enforce against potentially.
Yes.
Versus if it's a non-US company and they don't have any other, all they're doing is shipping you product. And they don't have anything else, other contact with the US, then that doesn't necessarily, that's not where you want to have it set up. So then you have to figure out, okay, well, are there other jurisdictions whose law, working with your attorney, are there other jurisdictions whose law I'm comfortable with, that, we could have that be the governing law? Or do I want to take advantage of alternative dispute resolution, so arbitration or mediation, and kind of set it up where, okay, well, I'm not comfortable necessarily with this being in their home country, but let's just say that this is going to be this is going to be the law, and this is going to be the jurisdiction we're going to hear everything in, and we're going to use mediation or arbitration. So it depends, but a lot of it depends on where the supplier's operations are, and or where the other company's operations are, and where we have operations, we being whatever company you happen to be working for, and then you can make that decision. So it's a layered decision, but yeah, it's possible. It has to be. I mean, almost. But it just is not as easy and as straightforward as if both of the companies are in the same jurisdiction.
Yes, yes.
Long answer, I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect, because when we evaluate suppliers, we consider, for example, are they already doing business with the US? So we know that in that way we minimize risk. If they have assets in the US, is better, right? From the risk mitigation standpoint. So
That's right.
that answer is great, Paul. I was asking that because many companies are concerned about their intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have valid reasons, or maybe not, or it's just a conception that we have. But sometimes they say, okay, we are trying in these times to find different sources in case that disruptions happen. And sometimes there's a concern that going with a supplier in China or in India, first, that we cannot have contracts. That you explained that is not the case. And in another point is that they say, well, maybe we can have contracts, but how can we enforce that contract? How can we actually protect our IP?
And I think, and it's kind of my answer with confidential information and IP is the same. The best way to keep a secret is not to tell anybody. I mean, don't share it. And so sometimes you have to, in order for them to do, the supplier to do what you want them to do, you have to share a certain amount of information with them. Yeah. But you don't necessarily have to share all of the information with them. So I think that from a sourcing perspective and a procurement perspective, find out really what you need to share. I mean, it could be that, and this might not be the case where it's something where intellectual property really is an issue, but it could be that, what is you're seeking to source is close or is the same as a standard that's out there, an industrial standard that's out there. It could be that you don't have to share in order for the supplier to respond, or potential supplier to respond to the RFQ. They don't have to see everything that's on the drawing. They don't, so it doesn't necessarily, don't just send out blindly the engineering drawing with all the information on it to the suppliers. Figure out if, the bare minimum of what you can share. And it's not just drawings. I mean, sometimes, you just have to be very thoughtful about, okay, well, what's the bare minimum of what I can share with this supplier in order to get that they can respond and they can give the information that they want us to give. Because, I'm kind of, you can set up a legal claim. So you have a legal claim to respond if there's a infringement of your intellectual property, but it's better not to be in that position at all because you haven't shared that. And understanding that's not always easy, and it sometimes can involve work, because it's a lot easier to grab that drawing and send it out than it is to say, okay, well, I need to get a redacted drawing, and that's work. That can be considerable work. But if you're really worried about protecting IP and proprietary information, That's one way that it can be addressed.
Oh,
And the other thing is that don't talk shop about proprietary information. As far as people who are like deeply involved in kind of the technical side and technology development, they are there because they like it and they like to talk to people about it. So often if you get engineers that are in the same position, they like talking about the tech things they're working on. You can't do that. It's hard because that's what you like doing, but you can't. You just have to stop. So that's a rich area. That could be. It probably should be a podcast of its own.
Yes. No, because it's great, and the answers that you provided very practical. Because that's true. We face those situations, right? And as you were saying, sometimes when we want to do something fast, it's much easier just to send and the supplier can read it. But that is not the best approach, because then we can have issues that are worse than the benefits that we are bringing to the organization. So,
that's right.
No,
that's right.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And since we are talking about confidentiality and intellectual property, how can we negotiate pricing without getting into those issues? Because I know that is a common mistake, unfortunately, within us, like the sourcing professionals.
And I think that, I mean, because if you think about it, just kind of the setting the stage, I mean, usually with people who supply, I say usually, but often there's going to be a duty of confidentiality, where if you're working with a company that's supplying you, they're going to provide you information that's confidential to them, and that you're going to be under an obligation not to disclose that to third parties. And that can include, product information, that can include price, that can include information about their operations. And so the question is, well, how do you, for example, if you have RFQs and you have RFQs coming, and you're at the point in the process where you've gotten the first things in, and you want to tell people, where they are relatively, right, with others. How do you provide that information and maintain the confidentiality owed to everyone? And I think the way that you do that, and just the kind of the initial answer is, you can't provide raw data from one party to another party without somehow, anonymizing or using percentages or, ranking. You've got to go through some sort of analysis. You can't just, and because, business people sometimes want to do this. They want to do this. They say, you need to lower your price because, boom, I received this from this person, and if you don't lower your price, I'm going to buy it from this person. Well, so you just bought yourself a confidentiality claim. You can't do that. I mean, usually. But what you can do is you can provide that information, not the raw data, but you can tell people the percentage they're off. You can tell them, what the spread was. You could do a scatter plot showing where people, there are all different kind of things you could do. But you can't, people want to play ping pong. You can't do that necessarily.
Exactly. Great point. And during these times, I know that price is a key element, as it has been, but also now the availability of material, because we have some cases like, okay, a supplier has some in stock, and we say, okay, the price is higher, we will get it in any case, we will get all what you have in stock. So in these times that we have experienced significant material shortages in many cases, and we need to qualify suppliers faster, new sources, because the current supplier cannot keep up sometimes with the capacity that we require. Do we need to approach this with legal contracts or a purchase order? What's the difference between a legal contract and a PO?
Well, and again, talking generally, I mean, the advantage of a purchase order is it's really kind of a standard document with standard terms of conditions that are used to buy an array of different products, just a broad range of different products. And so if it's something that's not necessary, if it's an industry standard, it's something that's not specific, you know, if it's a certain kind of hardware that, you know, is used across the industry or something, you can issue a PO quickly, get that in place, and you have it. And now, the further away you get, the more custom. If you're asking someone to develop something that's custom for you, or you're asking someone to provide a service, it becomes like you can still use a PO, but it becomes more difficult. Maybe, I mean, you think about the detail that can be included in certain unusual PO forms. You know, the little PO form, the little box. You know, how much detail can be included in that? Well, not a whole lot. Well, what can be done to help use the PO is that, you know, if you want to go into more detail, you can have a statement of work, and the statement of work the PO can refer to the statement of work, and the statement of work can capture the detail of, hey, the service or the product that's going to be delivered. But then if you start talking about getting underneath and having to adjust the terms and conditions of the PO, and now you're starting to do that in the statement of work, pretty soon you're at the point where you need a legal agreement. So yeah, POs are quicker. They're good for kind of purchases of like standard items, but the further away you get from that, the more detail you need to have documented. So you can do that with the statement of work, but then you get to a point where you're going to need a legal agreement.
Perfect. So the more complex, the more we will be using contracts instead of a purchase order. Great. And then, Paul, I was going to ask you about how to evaluate supplier performance in these times. It's related to the first questions that you addressed, because do we need to have new clauses? How do we do in this situation that is different to what we have been working or what we have seen before?
Well, hopefully, hopefully there are metrics, there are metrics in place before now. You know, I mean, hopefully it's not now that the metrics are being. So hopefully you think about cost, quality, delivery, you know, and how you measure cost, quality, and delivery, and that those metrics are going to be the same metrics that now we've had something happen, and there's going to be an agreement. The way that we've been measuring prior to this event is going to continue, and we're going to see the change, the effect in the metrics through the event. And it could be that what ends up happening that, hey, on-time delivery has changed. Hey, you didn't make a delivery to us in the month of April. Why was that? Well, you know, the world shut down. So I think that, yes, you've got to be able to measure what's important to you, and see that, make sure that you're getting what you need to get from the supplier. And frankly, the supplier needs to be able to measure their own ability and kind of make sure that, hey, I'm giving you what you need. And it's a lot easier to come to agreement with that before something happens than when you're in the midst of a crisis. So there's a lot there too, as far as, and of course, and it goes without saying that you can measure it, but it doesn't do you much good if it's not communicated. And so if it's something that, and if it's not clearly communicated, so and there's a balance here. But if someone's not hitting the mark, they need to be told they're not hitting the mark, and that needs to be communicated to them. And it may make for some difficult conversations, but if it's a lot better to have done that and have communicated it than to then want to take action and have never communicated it.
Yes.
Clearly.
Yes.
So.
Yes, you are right. So to give the opportunity for the supplier, right, to make a change, and also sometimes, or we can say many times, depends on us, right, on the organization. It's not only the supplier. We work together. In particular, in these times, right, that is so important to have good relationship with the suppliers because they have limited capacity. So they need to make decisions on how they are going to allocate that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. So Paul, I would like to thank you again for taking the time and today that is holiday. So thank you so much for doing that. And what I can tell you is that we will need a new episode because there are so many aspects to cover here, and I really like it because it's very helpful. These are situations that we see every day. And if we make a mistake, then, as we say before, it can be worse, right? We are not bringing benefit, we are bringing headaches to the leadership, so we don't want to do that.
That's right. I mean, well, that's the thing that I like working in this space is because you work across disciplines. So you work with engineers, you work with sourcing folks, you work with legal, you work with logistics, and then it's across geographies. And so you get to work with all different people in all different places, and that's a lot of the fun. So thank you.
Yes, and always there are some issues to fix.
There's always something to fix.
That's great. That's part of how supply chain is. That is really nice. So thank you very much, Paul. I'm sure that the audience is getting with these great insights and also practical tips on how to approach these two aspects, right? Purchasing and legal. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. We'll see you. Enjoy the holiday.
Thank you. You too, Paul. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.